The city of Lumeris was alive with light that evening. Towers stretched into the night sky, glowing with gentle colors that shifted like water. Among those towers stood the Grand Oriole Theater, a place that people across the galaxy knew by name. It was famous not only for its grand performances, but also for its beauty, the way its velvet balconies wrapped around the golden stage, and how the ceiling shone like a star field even when no lamps were lit. Daniel, a young human envoy, had been invited to attend a performance there. He had been living in Lumeris for a few months, representing Earth in cultural exchanges. Most of his days were filled with meetings, quiet dinners, and endless talks about trade and agreements. But tonight was different. Tonight he was a guest at the theater, and he felt both nervous and curious as he stepped through the tall glass doors. Inside, the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers greeted him. The floor was smooth marble, with tiny flecks that sparkled under the lamps. Aliens of many kinds filled the hall, their clothes flowing with silks, jewels, and metallic threads that shimmered as they moved. Daniel, wearing a simple black suit with a silver pin at his chest, felt plain compared to them, yet he held his head high. Humans were still new in this city, and he wanted to show respect without pretending to be something he was not. An usher guided him up the stairs and to one of the balconies. The seats were covered in velvet, deep crimson in color, soft under his hands as he sat down. From there he had a perfect view of the stage. He took a slow breath, letting the calm of the theater sink in. But before the lights dimmed, his eyes wandered across the hall. That was when he noticed her. Across from his balcony, slightly higher, sat a figure that drew his gaze in an instant. She was not human. Her form was taller, her skin faintly silver, almost glowing against the dark fabric of her dress. Her hair, long and flowing, shimmered with faint blue highlights as if touched by starlight. And her eyes, even from a distance, seemed to shine with quiet intelligence. She was seated with grace, her hands resting lightly on the velvet railing, her gaze focused on the stage below. Daniel's eyes lingered, perhaps longer than they should have. She looked different from anyone he had ever met, yet something about her felt strangely familiar, like a melody half remembered. For a brief moment, as though sensing his gaze, she turned her head. Their eyes met. It was only a heartbeat, a passing glance, but Daniel felt it deep inside. Her eyes, luminous and calm, held his for a second before she looked back to the stage. Daniel quickly looked away too, embarrassed at being caught staring. But the spark of curiosity inside him had already been lit, and no performance could fully distract him from it. The stage lights dimmed, and the play began. The performance was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Actors glided across the stage with movement so fluid it seemed as though they were floating. Their costumes shimmered with soft colors that changed as the music rose and fell. The language was foreign, a melodic tongue that Daniel didn't understand, but the emotion carried through clearly. Joy, sorrow, triumph, all of it was painted in sound, light, and movement. The audience was captivated. Daniel too leaned forward, drawn into the beauty of it. Yet every so often his eyes drifted back toward the opposite balcony. She was still there, watching with steady focus. Her face, though calm, revealed hints of wonder as the story unfolded. The play ended in a thunder of applause. The hall filled with the sound of clapping, cheers, and the subtle hums of alien voices expressing approval. Daniel joined in, smiling at the performers taking their bows. As the crowd began to rise, he glanced once more toward the balcony across the way. She had stood now, her posture tall and elegant. A small group of her own kind gathered around her, speaking in quiet tones. Daniel knew he should leave, return to his quarters, and prepare for tomorrow's duties. But he couldn't stop himself from watching her just a moment longer. Then, as if by chance, she looked back across the hall. Their eyes met again. This time it was not just a passing glance. For a brief instant, it felt as though the entire theater had fallen silent, leaving only the two of them in that shared gaze. And then, just as quickly, the moment ended. She turned away, walking with her group toward the golden doors. Daniel sat still, his heart beating a little faster than before. He did not even know her name. He had no reason to expect he would see her again. Yet something deep within told him that this was not the end. When Daniel finally left the theater, the night air was cool against his skin. The streets of Lumeris were alive with floating lanterns and soft music from distant plazas. He walked slowly, lost in thought. The play had been beautiful, yes, but it was her presence, her glance, that had left the strongest impression on him. As he reached his residence, Daniel paused by the window overlooking the city. The stars shone above, the same stars that stretched back toward Earth. He wondered what Mira, though he did not yet know her name, was doing at that very moment. Did she think of him too? Or had he already been forgotten among the many faces she must have seen? Daniel did not know the answer. But one thing was certain. He hoped he would return to the theater again. And when he did, he would look to the velvet balcony across the way, and perhaps if fate allowed, their eyes would meet once more. The night stretched long, filled with questions and quiet hope. And so began a story neither of them had expected, born not on a battlefield, nor in a council hall, but in the hush of velvet seats, beneath a ceiling painted with stars. The Grand Oriole Theater was alive again the next evening. Its glowing towers rose into the sky, lanterns floating along the streets below like fireflies. People of many species crowded its marble steps, their voices blending into a soft hum of excitement. Daniel had told himself he might not return so soon. He had official duties to prepare for and documents waiting at his desk. Yet as the evening came, his steps carried him back toward the theater without hesitation. Deep down, he knew the reason. He hoped to see her again. He entered the hall, greeted once more by the golden light and the polished beauty of the place. The ushers led him to the same balcony he had occupied the night before. He sat down, his hands resting on the velvet railing, his eyes drawn almost immediately across the theater. She was there, seated in the same balcony as before. Dressed in a flowing gown of deep blue that shimmered like the night sea, Mira sat with her hands folded neatly. Her posture was graceful, her expression calm, but her luminous eyes wandered as if searching for something beyond the stage. Daniel felt a small surge of relief and joy. He was not sure if it was luck or destiny, but she was here. The performance had not yet begun. The orchestra tuned their instruments below, soft notes drifting upward. The audience settled in, adjusting their seats, whispering to one another. Daniel glanced at the empty space beside him, then looked back across the hall. For a brief second, Mira's eyes lifted and met his. Unlike the first night, her gaze did not move away at once. There was a pause, a moment where the noise of the theater seemed to fade. Daniel offered a small, polite smile. To his quiet surprise, she returned it, just the faintest curve of her lips, but enough to stir his heart. The lights dimmed, and the play began. This evening's performance was different from the last. It told a story of travelers crossing seas of glass, their ship guided only by song. The music rose like waves, and the actors' steps echoed like water against stone. Daniel tried to focus, but his attention kept drifting. He found himself watching Mira more than the stage, noticing how her eyes followed every detail with care, how her hands occasionally tightened on the railing during moments of suspense. When the intermission came, the hall filled with movement as people stood, stretched, and spoke to one another. A soft light filled the balconies, giving them a golden glow. Daniel felt a nervous energy stir within him. This was his chance. He stood, smoothed his suit, and stepped carefully toward the side passage of the balcony. The ushers looked busy guiding other guests, and no one stopped him as he made his way around the curved walkway that connected the balconies. His steps were steady, though his heart beat quickly. When he reached the entrance to Mira's balcony, he paused. She sat there still, now alone, while the others who had accompanied her the night before seemed to have left for refreshments. For a moment, Daniel almost turned back, afraid of disturbing her. But then, as if sensing him, Mira lifted her head. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him standing at the archway. "Forgive me," Daniel said softly, bowing his head a little. "I hope I am not intruding. I only wished to thank you. Your presence yesterday made the performance more memorable for me." There was a short silence. Then Mira tilted her head, studying him. Her voice when she spoke was gentle and melodic. "You are human?" "Yes," Daniel replied with a faint smile. "From Earth. Daniel is my name."
Myra regarded him for another moment before replying. "Myra," she said simply. "I am a scholar. I study culture and the ways others see beauty." Daniel stepped closer, careful not to intrude too much. "Then I am honored to meet you, Myra. I am here as part of the envoy from Earth. We have many things to discuss in meetings and halls, but nothing prepared me for the theater of Lumerus. It is, unlike anything I have ever seen. Myra's lips curved slightly. That is why I come here often. The stage speaks beyond language. You do not need to know the words to feel the meaning. Daniel nodded, relieved by her kindness. He glanced toward the stage below, then back to her. You are right. Last night, I could not understand the actors' speech. Yet I felt their sorrow and their joy. It reached me here. He touched his chest lightly. Humans say that art is the bridge of hearts. Perhaps it is true. Myra looked at him with quiet interest. I have read much about humans. They are said to feel strongly, to pour themselves into music, words, and movement. But I did not expect to hear it from one of them directly. Daniel chuckled softly. Perhaps I am proving the books correct. For the first time, Myra let out a small laugh, a sound like bells carried by wind. It was brief, but it filled Daniel with warmth. He realized then that the theater balcony, though grand and full of history, felt smaller, more personal now, because of her. The orchestra played a signal, reminding guests the performance would soon resume. Daniel hesitated. May I stay here for the rest of the play? If it does not trouble you. Myra studied him again, her luminous eyes calm but unreadable. Finally, she gave a small nod. You may. Daniel sat down, leaving a respectful space between them. Together they turned their eyes back to the stage as the performance continued. The second act was filled with soaring music and deep emotion. Daniel, though focused on the story, found himself glancing at Myra from time to time. Their shoulders never touched, yet he felt a quiet connection growing. When the final curtain fell and the audience erupted into applause, they both clapped, their hands moving in unison. As the noise filled the hall, Daniel turned slightly toward her. Thank you, Myra, for allowing me this kindness. Tonight will be a memory I keep. Myra looked at him, her expression soft but thoughtful. You are different from what I expected of humans, Daniel. Perhaps I would like to hear more of how your people see the world. Daniel's heart lifted. Then perhaps we might meet here again. There was a pause. Myra tilted her head, then gave the faintest of smiles. Perhaps. And with that, she rose gracefully, her gown flowing like water as she left the balcony. Daniel watched her go, feeling as though he had just stepped into the first page of a story that was only beginning. When he finally returned to his quarters that night, the city seemed brighter than before, and the stars beyond the window seemed closer. He whispered her name once to himself, Myra, and smiled. The velvet balcony was no longer just a place to watch plays. It had become the stage of something greater, something neither of them could yet name. The following nights carried a rhythm of their own. Each evening, the Grand Oriole Theatre filled with lights, music, and voices from many worlds, and each evening, Daniel found his steps leading him back to the velvet balcony. It was no longer the performance alone that drew him. It was Myra. At first, he wondered if she would appear again, or if their second meeting had been only a fleeting moment of kindness. But when he arrived, Myra was there, graceful as always, her silver-lit skin and luminous eyes glowing softly under the balcony lamps. Each time, she acknowledged him with a small nod, and Daniel would feel his heart settle, as if the world had quietly given him permission to stay. The plays changed every night, but soon the performances became more than just art to them. Between acts, while the hall murmured with voices, Daniel and Myra would lean closer and share words. Their conversations began simply. He would ask about the meaning of a gesture on stage, or she would ask how a human would read the same scene. But slowly, the talk deepened, stretching far beyond the stage. One evening, as the orchestra rested between acts, Daniel turned toward her. On Earth, theaters are old places too. Some of them are hundreds of years old. People still gather there to hear music or watch plays. The walls carry memories. Sometimes, when you sit quietly in such places, you feel the voices of the past still around you. Myra tilted her head, her eyes shining with curiosity. And do humans believe those voices are real? Or is it only memory in your heart? Daniel smiled. Perhaps it is both. Humans like to believe that beauty leaves traces behind. Even when the people are gone, their art lingers in the air. Myra rested her hands on the velvet railing. That is not so different from my people's belief. We say that songs are eternal. Every note sung becomes part of the universe, like stars. They do not disappear, even if we cannot hear them. Daniel's gaze softened. Then your people and mine are not so different after all. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Perhaps not. Another evening, as a tragic play unfolded below, Daniel asked, "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to stand there, on the stage, telling a story to all these people?" Myra's eyes followed the actors, who moved with flawless grace. I was trained in speech, not in performance. My duty was to study, to observe, to learn from others and preserve knowledge. But sometimes, yes, I wonder. What if instead of recording the voices of others, I had raised my own? You have a voice worth hearing, Daniel said without hesitation. When you speak, even in quiet tones, you carry meaning. I think the theater would be honored to hear you. Myra turned toward him, surprised by the warmth in his words. For a moment, she simply studied him, as though trying to understand how a human envoy could speak with such conviction. Then she looked away, but Daniel thought he saw a gentle light touch her expression. On yet another night, the two spoke about Earth. Myra had asked him to describe human celebrations. We have many, Daniel explained. Some are for seasons, some for history, some for family. But what I like most are the small ones gathering around a fire, telling stories, singing together even if the voices are not perfect. It is not about performance, it is about being close. Myra listened intently, her luminous eyes reflecting the soft glow of the balcony lamps. Among my people, gatherings are quiet, filled with reflection. But when I hear of humans, I imagine warmth. Perhaps that is why your art feels so alive. It is not only skill, it is heart. Daniel chuckled. That is generous of you to say. Many times, humans fail at perfection. But yes, we always put our heart into what we do. Myra leaned her chin lightly against her hand, still watching him. That may be why I find it easy to speak with you. You do not hide your thoughts. You place them openly, like an offering. Daniel felt his chest tighten slightly at her words. He realized then that what had begun as small conversations about art had grown into something more meaningful. They were no longer two strangers watching the same stage. They were two souls uncovering each other's worlds. Over the following nights, their bond deepened. Myra shared stories of her youth, how she had spent long hours in halls of learning, listening to the voices of elders and copying down every word. She spoke of the pressure of expectation that as a scholar, she must always remain distant, objective, never involved with those she studied. But here, she admitted one evening, in this balcony, I feel less like a scholar and more like myself. Perhaps that is dangerous. But perhaps it is what I needed. Daniel listened carefully. He understood the weight of duty, he carried it himself as Earth's envoy. Sometimes, he said softly, we forget that we are people before we are titles. Even an envoy or a scholar deserves to feel alive. Myra's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, silence spoke more than words. There were evenings when laughter filled the balcony, quiet enough that the audience below could not hear. Daniel would share clumsy tales of his first days on Lumerus, how he had once bowed incorrectly in a council meeting, causing gentle confusion, or how he had struggled to eat a local dish that shifted its flavor with every bite. Myra's laughter would spill like clear bells, and Daniel would join her, both of them shaking their heads at the oddities of cross-world encounters. At times, though, their talks grew serious. Myra confessed her worry that her people would not look kindly upon her closeness with a human. There are those who say scholars must never cross the lines they observe, she said one night, her voice low. We are to record, not to join. To feel is to risk losing objectivity. Daniel's reply was steady. But to never feel is to risk losing your heart. What is knowledge without understanding? What is art without emotion? Her eyes lingered on him, and though she did not answer at once, her silence carried weight. Through all these moments, the balcony became their world. The velvet seats, the golden lamps, the distant music, all of it surrounded them like a shield, protecting their quiet talks. To others, they were just two figures seated side by side. But within that space, they were building something rare. When the final act of one performance ended and the audience rose to cheer, Daniel leaned closer and whispered, "This balcony is more than a seat now. To me, it feels like a bridge between two worlds." Myra looked at him, her expression unreadable for a long second. Then, slowly, she nodded. "A bridge," she repeated softly. "Yes. Perhaps that is what it has become." As they left the theater that night, walking down different staircases, Daniel caught her gaze one last time across the crowded hall. There was no need for words. The look they shared said enough that something was growing between them, fragile yet strong, born in the shadows of velvet curtains and the glow of shared stories. And though neither spoke of it openly yet, both knew, their lives were changing. The whispers began softly, like the faint rustle of curtains in the theater. At first, Daniel barely noticed them. He and Myra continued to meet in the velvet balcony, watching plays side by side, sharing stories between acts. To him, those hours felt like a secret world, shielded from the noise of duty and expectation. But the world outside the balcony was not blind. During one evening's performance, Daniel felt a pair of eyes linger on him from across the hall. When he turned, he saw a group of diplomats from another species murmuring quietly, their gazes shifting toward him and Myra. He tried to ignore it, but something in their expressions warned him that his presence with her was becoming a subject of curiosity. The next day, while Daniel was attending a council meeting, a fellow envoy leaned closer and whispered, "The scholars of Lumerus are highly respected. It is unusual for one to spend so much time with an outsider. People are beginning to ask questions." Daniel kept his expression calm, but the words weighed on him. Questions often led to judgments, and judgments could turn into obstacles. That evening, when he returned to the theater, Myra was quieter than usual. She still welcomed him with a nod, but her eyes carried a shadow. Through the first act, she watched the play without speaking. Daniel sensed her mind was far away. During the intermission, he finally asked, "Myra, is something troubling you?" She hesitated before answering. "There are voices." Some say it is not proper for me to sit here with you every night. They believe a scholar must remain apart. My role is to observe, not to share. Her voice softened on the last word. Daniel's chest tightened. He had expected this, but hearing it from her lips struck deeper than he imagined. "And what do you believe?" he asked gently. Myra looked down at her hands resting on the velvet railing. For a long moment, she was silent. Then she whispered, "I do not know. My heart says one thing, my duty another." The orchestra began again, pulling the audience back into the story. But Daniel could hardly follow the performance. His thoughts circled around her words, heavy and uncertain. When the play ended, Myra rose quickly. "I should go," she said softly. Daniel stood too, wanting to speak, to ask her to stay. But the hesitation in her eyes stopped him. He simply bowed his head and said, "Good night, Myra." She gave a small nod, then turned and walked away. That night, Daniel returned to his quarters with a heaviness he could not shake. The balcony that had once felt like their world now seemed fragile, like glass ready to crack. The following evening, Daniel still went to the theater. He sat in the velvet balcony, waiting, hoping. But when the lights dimmed, the seat across the hall remained empty. For the first time since they had met, Myra did not come. Daniel tried to focus on the play, but the stage felt hollow without her presence. He found himself glancing again and again toward her empty balcony, each time feeling the silence more deeply. When the performance ended, he stayed seated longer than usual, unwilling to leave. The next night was the same. He came, he waited, and the seat remained empty. Whispers in the hall grew louder now. People spoke more openly, wondering why the human envoy sat alone night after night. Daniel ignored them, but inside he felt a growing ache. He feared he had lost something precious before it had truly begun. On the third evening, as the final act closed, Daniel stood to leave. His steps were slow, his heart heavy. He walked down the marble staircase, the sound of other guests' laughter echoing around him. And then, just as he was about to leave the golden doors, a voice called softly, "Daniel." He turned sharply. At the edge of the hall, standing near one of the tall pillars, was Myra. She wore a simple gown tonight, her silver-lit skin glowing faintly under the lamps. Her luminous eyes met his, filled with both hesitation and resolve. "Myra," Daniel breathed, relief flooding him. "I thought I know," she interrupted gently. She walked closer, her steps graceful but firm. "I thought I could stay away. I thought it would be easier if I listened to duty and silence. But the balcony felt empty without you. The stage, the music, none of it carried the same meaning." Daniel's chest loosened as hope stirred again. "Then why did you stay away?" Myra lowered her gaze. "Fear. Fear of what others would say. Fear of being judged unfit as a scholar. My people expect me to be distant, to study without involvement. But," she looked up again, her eyes shining with emotion, "but my heart does not follow those rules. My heart chooses differently." Daniel stepped closer, careful but steady. "Myra, I will never ask you to choose against your people. But I cannot deny what I feel. When I sit in that balcony with you, the world feels brighter. I do not want to lose that." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft echo of departing footsteps in the hall. Then Myra gave a small, trembling smile. "Neither do I." They stood there, not touching, not needing to. The truth in their words was enough. From that night onward, things changed. Myra still carried her caution, but she no longer stayed away. She returned to the balcony, and Daniel was there to meet her. Whispers still stirred in the theater, but Myra ignored them now. She had made her choice, and it was not to let fear silence her heart. One evening, as the orchestra played a soft melody between acts, Daniel leaned closer and said quietly, "You were brave to come back." Myra's eyes glowed softly. It was not bravery. It was honesty. Sometimes honesty is more frightening than courage. Daniel smiled. "Then I am grateful for your honesty." Myra looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself a true smile, warm and unguarded. In that moment, Daniel knew the test of distance had not broken them. Instead, it had made them stronger. The velvet balcony, once nearly lost to silence, had become their place once again. But now, every glance, every shared word, carried deeper meaning. They had faced the pull of distance and chosen instead to stay near. And though the world outside might still whisper, within that balcony, their voices rose above the noise. Two souls bound not by duty, but by choice. The evening sky over the alien city was a deep shade of violet, glowing softly as the twin moons began to rise. Daniel stood outside the great theater, his heart filled with both relief and anticipation. For many days he had worried that Myra would not return, that fear of judgment and duty would keep her away forever. But now she had come back to him, and her quiet words the last time they met had stayed in his mind, "My heart cannot stay silent anymore." Daniel entered the theater and walked toward the familiar balcony, the velvet seats waiting like loyal companions to the story that had unfolded there. The air was scented with flowers placed along the marble halls, and the low hum of conversations filled the space. But all these sounds and sights faded for Daniel when he saw Myra already waiting in their balcony. She was standing by the railing, her luminous eyes looking down at the stage below. When she turned and saw him, her face softened with a smile that seemed to hold the entire warmth of the night. "You came," Daniel whispered as he reached her side. "I could not stay away," Myra replied gently. "Even when I tried, my thoughts always returned here, to you, to this place." For a long moment, they simply stood together, the soft velvet beneath their hands, the glow of the stage lamps rising as the performance prepared to begin. It felt as if the balcony itself had become a witness to their bond, carrying the memory of every glance, every word, every silence they had shared. The orchestra began to play, and the curtains lifted, but Daniel and Myra found themselves only half aware of the performance. Their hearts were more focused on each other than on the stage. Still, there was comfort in the music, as if it formed a gentle background to the story of their lives. "Myra," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying both resolve and tenderness, "I know what others whisper about us. I know some disapprove. But I also know that what we have is real. I will not hide it, and I will not let politics or fear take it from us." Myra looked down for a moment, her hands tightening against the railing. "You are brave, Daniel. Braver than I am. I have always lived by rules, by traditions, by the voices of others. But with you, I feel something stronger than all of that. It frightens me, yet it gives me hope too." Daniel reached out and placed his hand gently over hers. "Hope is enough. Hope can guide us through the darkest halls." Her luminous eyes lifted to his, and she smiled faintly. "Then let us walk forward with that hope." The play below told a story of two distant lovers separated by fate, yet reunited by courage. The irony was not lost on either of them. The audience around them leaned forward, captivated by the actors on stage, but Daniel and Myra felt as though their own story was being reflected back at them through the art. When the curtain fell at the end of the act, applause thundered through the theater. Yet in the balcony, Daniel and Myra stayed quiet, their eyes meeting in a silence more powerful than clapping hands or cheering voices. "Daniel," Myra said softly, "I want us to claim this place, this balcony, as our own. Not in the sense of ownership, but as a memory that belongs to us. No matter what happens tomorrow, no matter where duty takes us, let this balcony remain ours." Daniel's heart tightened with emotion. He nodded, his voice low. "Then it is ours. A place for truth, for love, for courage. Our velvet balcony." The next weeks were not easy. The whispers grew louder, reaching officials and scholars, stirring debates in the council halls. Some argued that the bond between human envoy and alien scholar was dangerous, that it might disrupt fragile alliances. Others saw it as a symbol of hope, proof that species so different could still find harmony. Myra faced questions from her peers, some gentle, some sharp. Daniel too was summoned by human representatives who advised caution, warning him not to let personal feelings cloud his mission. But both of them carried strength now, a strength built from the nights they had shared in the balcony. When doubt tried to creep in, Daniel remembered Myra's words, her decision to choose her heart over fear. When Myra felt the weight of judgment, she recalled Daniel's promise never to hide what they had. These memories became their shield. One evening, as the council gathered to discuss cultural ties, Daniel spoke openly. "Art brings us together," he said firmly. "Stories, music, and theaters have always been bridges between people. And love," he paused, his eyes finding Myra's across the chamber, "is also a kind of art. To silence it, to fear it, would be to destroy the very spirit of unity we claim to honor." Myra, encouraged by his words, stood as well. "We study plays that tell of courage, of hearts that cross boundaries, of harmony found in difference. If we cannot live by those lessons, then what meaning do our stories hold?" There was silence in the chamber. Some frowned, some nodded thoughtfully. But in that silence, Daniel and Myra felt that they had done what mattered most. They had spoken truth without shame. Later that night, they returned once again to the velvet balcony. The theater was quieter than usual, the performance more solemn, yet the balcony felt alive with the echo of their voices. Myra leaned against Daniel, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "Do you think they will ever accept us fully?" she asked. Daniel looked out over the glowing stage. "Maybe not all of them. Maybe never completely. But we did not come here to be accepted by everyone. We came here to live honestly. That is enough for me." "And for me," Myra whispered. The performance reached its final scene, a story of triumph after struggle, and when the curtain fell, Daniel and Myra stood hand in hand, their silhouettes framed against the velvet curtains. For them, the balcony was no longer just a seat in a theater. It had become a symbol, a sanctuary, a promise. It held their laughter, their doubts, their courage, and their love. It was the place where two souls from different worlds had chosen each other against all odds. As they left the theater, walking side by side into the violet night, the world around them continued with its noise, its debates, its uncertainties. But within their hearts, there was quiet certainty. The Velvet Theater balcony would always be theirs, not as a possession, but as a living memory. A memory of love that rose above rules, above whispers, above fear. And in that memory, their passion lived on, strong and unshaken, a story that would one day inspire others to believe that even across the widest distances, Hearts could find their way to each other.